Welcome back! Today we're beginning a study of Goethe's Faust, the story of the man who sells his soul to the devil. In our first episode here, we're going to do a little bit of introduction to the story, and we're going to look at the prologue, which comes before part 1 of Faust. And over the next several episodes, we'll look maybe 1 or 2 scenes at a time, and examine the text and talk about its significance. Faust is an early and excellent example of Romanticism. Goethe's writings are very romantic, and if you want to know a little bit more about Romanticism and its characteristics, you might want to watch the video over here first. It's one of my older videos. Goethe took a really long time to write this book. He started in 1772, and it wasn't finished until 1832. That's 60 years. Really, this book is a work of a lifetime. And the character Faust is actually not original to Goethe. He's taking an older legend, the story of Faust or Dr. Faustus, and exploring it in a brand new way. Faustus was apparently a semi-historical figure, a creepy old man who dabbled in all kinds of alchemy and things that made people dislike him. The legend around him talks about him getting into magic and getting in touch with all of these spirits that gave him power, but ultimately led to his destruction. There's another famous play about this character called Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe, a contemporary of Shakespeare's. And in his play, he explores the tension between free will and fate. This character sells his soul to the devil, Mephistopheles, in order to get magic and power and pleasure and enjoy his life. But then along the way, he begins to debate whether or not he ought to make a change and try to get that soul back. He never does, and ultimately he's dragged down to hell. And there's some question whether this was inevitable, whether he really ever had a choice, or whether he was always fated to die this way. Goethe's Faust is a little bit more complex than that. It is interested in the idea of choice, but it is also interested in something more complicated. Faust, in Goethe's version, is not simply out for pleasure. He's not simply out for just a bunch of magic and power so he can live it up for a few years. Instead, Goethe's Faust is more about desiring to find what it truly means to be human. And this is much more complicated. He's trying to understand the essence of everything, and most importantly, the essence of himself. What does it mean to be a human being? And where can you find the true meaning behind that? Instead of simply seeking a few years of pleasure, Faust wants to know the meaning behind life. Something that's going to be a lot more complicated for Mephistopheles to give him. Also, there are huge sections of Faust which are completely new to Goethe's version, particularly the whole section with Gretchen. And, spoilers, this is the version where Faust actually gets to go to heaven. Why is that? How does Goethe make him overcome? We'll see as we continue our study. The play opens with a prologue that actually comes before the first part, that encompasses ideas that will set the stage for both parts 1 and 2. This prologue is not set on Earth with Faust, but in heaven. It opens with 3 archangels, Raphael, Gabriel, and Michael, standing before the Lord and celebrating all of his wonderful works in very complex, ceremonious language. When I teach this part to high schoolers, I usually enjoy reading this with them and watching the stare of disbelief and horror on their faces as they realize how hard this text actually is. The version I'm using, translated by Walter Arndt, uses words such as hymnic, paradisic, lucence, and a first-time reader might get glassy eyes pretty quickly here. But it's really not as bad as it seems, and as you begin to look at it, you begin to realize that these angels are just using very lofty, very formal rhetoric in order to stand before the Lord and celebrate all of his wonderful works. Raphael talks about the sun spinning in the sky, the planets, and all of them doing a heavenly dance that celebrates how perfect everything is, and always has been since the very beginning. Gabriel talks about the cycles of day and night and the tides that come in and out of the ocean, talking about how perfect they all are and how they've always been perfect since the beginning. And Michael talks about the weather, these storms that come in with great power, but then recognize their limits and go back out into a beautiful, calm day again. All of these things reflect the great system that the Lord has put in place and has been there since the beginning. Sounds really nice, but then in walks Mephistopheles, our fly in the ointment. And his language is suddenly much easier than these angels. He's very cheeky. Since once again, O Lord, I find you deigning to walk amongst us, asking how we do. And in the past you thought me entertaining, so you see me too here with your retinue. Fine speeches are, beg pardon, not my forte. Though all this round may mock me, but I know my rhetoric you'd laugh at out of court, had you not cast off laughter long ago. Mephistopheles has come here not to celebrate the Lord's creation, but to critique the one thing that he sees as particularly flawed, and that is humanity. He talks about how pathetic they are, but the worst part of it all is that they have a little glimmer of heaven's light in them, which they call reason, and just leads to curiosity, which leads to disaster. They're awful. The Lord asks, "And you have no other news? Do you come always only to accuse? Does nothing please you ever on this earth?" And Mephistopheles says, "No, Lord, I find it still of precious little worth. I feel for mankind in their wretchedness. It almost makes me want to plague them less." In the midst of his complaining, the Lord suddenly brings up a character, the character of Faust. It seems as though the Lord is responding to Mephistopheles' complaints about humanity by saying, "Hey, wait a second. Have you noticed Faust? Is Faust the exception to the rule? Is he the hero, the champion for humanity?" Mephistopheles doesn't think this is a good choice. "Forsooth, he serves you in a curious fashion. None of this earth the madman's drink or ration. He's driven far afield by some strange leaven. He's half aware of his demented quest. He claims the most resplendent stars from heaven, and from the earth each pleasure's highest zest. Yet near or far he finds no haven of solace for his deeply troubled breast." Mephistopheles says, "That's your choice? That's the guy you want to serve you? All he does is wander around in discontent, realizing that his life is empty and hollow. He can't find any meaning, and he doesn't even know where to look for it. That's good?" But the Lord replies, "And though he serve me now in clouded ways, soon I shall guide him so his spirit clears. The gardener knows by the young tree's green haze, the bloom and fruit will grace it down the years." The Lord sees Faust's potential. He may not be much right now. He may be just an empty person who's questing for meaning, who can't find it, but his potential says he will grow into something good in the end. But Mephistopheles begs to differ. "You'll lose him yet. I offer bet and tally, provided that your honor gives me leave to lead him gently up my alley." So Mephistopheles offers a bet. "I bet I can win Faust's soul." Does this sound vaguely familiar to you? It ought to. It parallels almost exactly the story of Job from the Bible. Let's look at that now. The book of Job starts out by describing Job, who is a perfect man, upright, one who feared God and eschewed evil. He's very rich and very well off. But then, shortly after this, verse 6 of chapter 1 of Job, it says, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Doth Job fear God for naught? Hast thou not made an hedge around him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord." Goethe is obviously drawing parallels between these two. The layout is exactly the same. The Lord brings up Job, the Lord brings up Faust. Satan offers a bet, Mephistopheles offers a bet. However, the characters of Job and Faust are really very different. Faust is not perfect. He's not upright, he's not sweet-hearted and pure. So why does Goethe draw this connection? After all, the rest of the story has really not that much in common, except that there is a bet between the Lord and Mephistopheles about Faust's soul. And that's going to set the tone for the entire book. If we cut off the prologue and simply read part 1 and part 2, we're going to get a different story. This story is a story of human struggle. It's a story about the desire for self-fulfillment. But there's also a cosmic significance that Goethe lays over the top of it, that all of this really is about the battle between good and evil, the great forces outside even the realm that Faust understands. In Job's version, the question is, can Job be good for goodness' sake? Because he loves God, not because he's been given nice fancy presents? And the answer ultimately is yes. Job holds up his end of the bargain. But Faust is about potential. It's not, is Faust able to keep where he is, but is Faust ultimately able to find that fulfillment that he's been looking for all this time? So the Lord agrees, sets the condition that Mephistopheles can no longer play with him after Faust is dead. As long as Faust is alive, Mephistopheles can do whatever he wants. The Lord won't intervene. Both the Lord and Mephistopheles feel pretty confident in their end of the bet, but then we come to an interesting statement by the Lord. Then to enjoy free visitation. I never did abominate your kind. Of all the spirits of negation, the rogue has been least onerous to my mind. Man all too easily grows lax and mellow. He soon elects repose at any price, and so I like to pair him with a fellow to play the deuce, to stir, and to entice. Interesting, and maybe a bit surprising that the Lord says, Mephistopheles, I don't mind you so much. You're not so bad. In fact, I kind of like having you around. We don't normally think like that with the Lord and the devil. But he goes on to point out that humanity, if you leave him alone, just kind of sits there and watches Netflix and takes big long naps. Throw the devil in there and you can get things working. Get the people stirred up and actually have them respond to their situation. Next, the Lord turns and speaks to the angels. Now the angels, who have been celebrating God's creation but not really interacting with it, have a specific role here. They're not going to intervene in the temptation of Faust, but they are going to stand aside and watch. This is important because there's someone else around who's standing aside and watching. It's us, the readers or the viewers. And so when the Lord gives these angels specific instructions on how to view this, those instructions are also for us, the audience. Rejoice you in the fount of living grace. By ever active, ever live creation, in love's enchanting fetters be you caught. And that which sways in wavering revelation, may you compact it with enduring thought. So he gives us 3 pieces of instruction as we are viewing this play. Number 1, always rejoice in the fount of living grace. Grace is where it's at. Number 2, be caught up in love, bound up by love. Okay, so grace and love are the 2 most important characteristics we're to be looking for in this story of the man who sells his soul to the devil. It's going to be a dark story, but there is going to be good there. We just have to look for it. And the last piece of instruction that the Lord gives to us is that which sways in wavering revelation, may you compact it with enduring thought. So when we see this complex and confusing tale with all of these ideas going back and forth, we are to compact that with enduring thought. We're to be grounded. And to be grounded in what? Those 2 characteristics that we've already been looking for, grace and love. This reminds me a lot of the beginning of Nathaniel Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter, when Hawthorne is talking to us about the prison door, the dark, ominous prison door, and the beautiful rose bush growing right beside the prison door. And he plucks the rose from the rose bush and hands it to the reader and says, "Here, reader, take this and remember this in the midst of a tale of human frailty and sorrow." It's that hope we're to be looking for all throughout the story. It's an interesting idea for the author to tell us how to read his book and what to look for as we begin. So the Lord and his angels move off and Mephistopheles just keeps on being cheeky. Say what you like, it's quite a compliment, a swell like him, so man to man with the devil. And that brings us to the end of the prologue. Next time, we'll look at the first scene of the first part, the scene Night. And we'll really get to meet our main character, Faust. One thing I've done over the past few years with my students to try to underscore the romanticism of this play is to go through and take each scene and talk about which Disney song it most relates to. Because Faust really is just a Disney princess in disguise. Over the next several episodes, at the end of each episode, I'll show you which Disney song most relates to the scene we're talking about. It's part of my parody collection, Faust, the original Disney princess. If you'd like to watch the next episode, you can click up here. If you'd like to subscribe, you can click down here. Or click over here to watch something else. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.